the silence of the void between stars is not an empty silence. It is a thick, resonant thing, heavy with the echoes of cosmic events too large and too slow for mortal senses to perceive. On the bridge of the Xylosian Arbiter-class vessel Omniscient View, Overseer Klarn experienced it as a soothing hum, a confirmation of order. His species, the Xylos, had mastered the great silences millennia ago. Their philosophy was one of perfect, rational harmony. They observed, they calculated, they assimilated. Emotional species were studied, their chaotic energies catalogued and, if necessary, subdued for the greater galactic good. They were the gardeners of the cosmos, pruning the uncontrollable. Humanity, designated Sol 3 Intelligence Species 778, was initially categorized as chaotic potential, low yield. Their world was a beautiful, turbulent marble of blue and green, racked by storms and tectonic tantrums. Their history was a litany of self-inflicted wounds, wars over arbitrary borders, resources, and ideological phantoms. To the Xylos, they were children playing with sharpened stones, worthy of observation but posing no threat to the serene, mature civilizations of the galactic arm. Their unification under a single planetary government a century prior was seen as a quaint, belated step towards adolescent coherence. The first contact was, by Xylosian standards, gracious. A single ship, the Omniscient View, entered orbit. Communications were established with the human planetary accord. The message was one of enlightened welcome, tinged with gentle condescension. Humanity was offered a place in the Xylosian hegemony, a protected protectorate status. There were benefits, technological uplift, medical miracles, freedom from scarcity. The conditions were standard, full cultural and biological integration into Xylosian normative frameworks, the dissolution of uniquely human dissonant practices, which, from the transcripts, appeared to include competitive sports, certain forms of artistic expression, and their entire corpus of pre-unification philosophy, and the installation of a guiding adjunct to oversee the transition. The Accord Council debated. Fear wrestled with awe. The promise of the stars versus the erasure of their soul. They asked for time. Overseer Klarn, reviewing the sessions, found their indecision illogical. The benefits were overwhelming. Their hesitation could only be a symptom of the very emotional fragility the hegemony sought to cure. To expedite their education, he ordered a demonstration. A single, pearl-white energy lance descended from the Omniscient View and touched a remote, uninhabited island chain in the Pacific Ocean. There was no explosion, no crude kinetic fire. The lance simply, unmade. Molecular bonds dissolved. The island and a significant volume of the sea beneath it ceased to exist, replaced by a perfectly smooth, glassy crater that steamed gently. The message was clear: resistance is not merely futile, it is erasure. The human transmission that followed was not from the Council. It was from a military officer, his uniform simple, his face a mask of controlled ash. That was a sovereign territory of Earth, he said, his voice devoid of the pleading or panic Klarn expected. An act of war has been committed. Klarn responded with textbook patience. It was an act of clarity. You speak of war as if it is a transaction between equals. You have nothing to transact with. You have only a choice: harmonious elevation or chaotic oblivion. Your emotional concepts of sovereignty and violence are weaknesses you must shed. The human did not blink. You misunderstand. I wasn't negotiating. I was informing. And you are wrong about our weaknesses. This was the first puzzle. Klarn expected capitulation or rage. He received neither. He received a statement of fact, colder than the void outside his viewport. The Accord Council, in a move that shocked their population and confused the Xylos, did not surrender. They declared a state of existential defense. The Omniscient View began a systematic campaign of demonstrations, unpopulated areas, military installations, which were, to Xylosian censors, laughably primitive, and, finally, symbolic cultural sites. The Great Pyramids were smoothed into silica sheets. The Mount Rushmore faces flowed like warm wax into featurelessness. Each act was precise, clean, and designed to break the human spirit by demonstrating the utter insignificance of their heritage and their might. But humanity did not break. They went quiet. Their global networks churned with encrypted data. Their cities dimmed. Their ships vanished from the skies. Passive scans showed immense tectonic activity in their planetary crust, deep, rhythmic booms that traveled through the mantle. The Xylosian psych profile teams were fascinated. This was not the chaos of panic. It was the focus of a hive preparing for winter. Or for war. "They are digging in," a junior analyst suggested. A final, futile gesture of defiance from their burrows. Klarn was not so sure. The silence had a different quality than despair. It was the silence of a blade being sharpened out of sight. Then, the transmissions began. Not from governments, but from individuals. From bunkers, from mountain caves, from the rubble of their cities. Shortwave radio bursts, tight beam laser comms scrambled and rebroadcast. They were stories. They were tales of Thermopylae, where 300 men defied an empire. Of the Battle of Stalingrad, where soldiers died for a single room, a single stairwell. Of Rorke's Drift, of the Battle of the Bulge, of the Siege of Vienna. They spoke of Horatius at the bridge, of a small, doomed ship called the Bismarck fighting until it was a burning hulk, of a phrase, nuts. They spoke not just of victory, but of the will required to stare into the abyss of certain defeat and decide to make the abyss flinch. They spoke of a concept alien to the Xylos, that there was something worse than physical annihilation. It was called submission. Klarn had these narratives translated and analyzed. Mytho-historical propaganda, the report concluded. An irrational valorization of futile resistance. A final psychological defense mechanism. But the stories kept coming. And, with them, data. Not just from Earth. Long-range sensors at the edge of the Sol system began to ping. Objects were moving. Not on predictable, efficient orbits, but on chaotic, high-energy ballistic curves. They were small, most no larger than a Xylosian shuttle. They emitted minimal energy, their hulls coated in radar-absorbent material derived, scans suggested, from the pulverized remains of their demolished monuments, a crude but effective stealth. They were accelerating on pillars of primitive but powerful chemical propulsion, riding columns of fire and anger. The omniscient view's point defense systems activated, lancing out with precise beams. They vaporized the first wave effortlessly. Then, the second. The third wave came in, and the system's tracking algorithms faltered. The human projectiles were jinking, performing random, fuel-expensive maneuvers that defied efficient ballistic logic. They were sacrificing range, stability, even structural integrity for unpredictability. A few got through. They were not nuclear, as expected. They were kinetic rods, solid tungsten slugs moving at a fraction of light speed. They struck the omniscient view's outer hull. The ship shuddered, alarms sang. The damage was minimal, but the fact of it was an electric shock to the crew. "They are attempting to swarm us with primitive kinetics," Klarn stated, maintaining calm. "A tactic of desperation. Increase defensive coverage. Target their launch points." But the launch points were everywhere. From the dark side of the moon, from hidden silos in the tundra, from converted commercial freighters drifting in the asteroid belt. Humanity was not fighting a battle. It was conducting a symphony of fire, every note a sacrifice. And then came the fourth wave. Among the 1,000 signatures, one was different. Larger. Hotter. It didn't jink. It came straight on, a bull charging a matador. Its IFF tag, broadcast on an open channel, identified it as the Permanent Sunset. Scans showed its composition was an amalgam of a decommissioned orbital habitat module, heavy engine blocks from interplanetary tugs, and a spine of high-yield chemical boosters. It was a flying mountain of scrap, held together by hope and hatred. Point defense converged on it. Beams sheared away chunks of hull, detonated booster stages. It kept coming, a mutilated beast bleeding air and debris. Its transmission cut through the chaos, a single voice, singing. It was an old song, a warrior's dirge from a long-forgotten human conflict. The voice was rough, off-key, and utterly defiant. It slammed into the omniscient view's primary energy shield at a significant percentage of lightspeed. The shield, designed to dissipate directed energy and diffuse plasma, buckled under the sheer, concentrated kinetic monstrosity. The permanent sunset and the shield generator failed in a mutual embrace of light and force. A temporary breach. A hole. In that moment, a fifth wave, hidden in the radar shadow and energy wash of the kamikaze, shot through the gap. Dozens of smaller projectiles, these shaped not like rods but like spears. They impacted across the omniscient view's hull, not to penetrate, but to attach. Magnetic clamps fired. Then, drills. They were boarding pods. The concept was so archaic, so viscerally barbaric, that the Xylosian security protocols had no immediate response. Galactic warfare was conducted at ranges of light seconds, with energy and information. Close combat was a primitive absurdity. The humans who erupted from those pods into the clean, brightly lit corridors of the hegemony ship were not the polished soldiers of Xylosian tactical simulations. They were encased in heavy, powered armor, scarred and welded from 100 different industrial templates. Their visors were blank, reflective metal. They carried not sleek energy casters, but projectile weapons, guns that roared with chemical thunder, filling the sterile air with smoke and the smell of burnt powder. And they moved with a terrifying, coordinated ferocity. Klarn, watching from the bridge via security feeds, saw his disciplined security teams fall. Their precise beams could slice through metal, but the human's armor was layered, ablative, designed to absorb and disperse. A Xylosian would aim for a center mass killshot, a human would take that hit on the shoulder plate, stagger, and keep coming, closing the distance. They fought for corridors, for junction nodes, for control of life support. They used explosives, monofilament wires, and a brutal, close-quarters physicality that was horrifying to behold. They did not seek to disable, they sought to annihilate. One feed showed a human, his armor breached at the torso, using his own body to wedge open a critical bulkhead door, allowing his squad to flood through before he collapsed. Another showed a human throwing a canister that emitted not poison, but a screaming, discordant soundwave, a weaponized form of their music that disoriented and physically pained the Xylosian auditory senses. They were not just invading the ship, they were infecting it with their chaos. With their fire. Klarn's calm finally cracked. They are insane. They waste lives. They waste themselves. His tactical officer, voice trembling, said, "Overseer, they are targeting the central data core. They are in the archive halls." The archives. The heart of the omniscient view's purpose. The collected knowledge of 1,000,000 assessed species, the cultural indices, the psychological profiles. The library of what was, and what was deemed acceptable to be. Klarn led the final defense there. He stood before the great crystalline matrix of the core, surrounded by his last, best guards. The humans arrived. They were few now, perhaps a dozen out of the hundreds who had boarded. Their armor was cracked, smeared with strange colors, their own blood and that of his crew. One stepped forward. He removed his helmet. It was the same officer from the first transmission. His face was older now, etched with soot and fatigue, but his eyes were the same, cold fire. He did not aim his weapon at Klarn. He simply looked at the data core, its light playing over his face. "You wanted to save us from our weaknesses," the human said, his voice raw from breathing smoke. "You saw our history of war, our passion, our stubbornness, our grief. You saw them as flaws to be corrected." "They are flaws," Klarn hissed, his harmonic speech patterns fraying. "Look at what they have driven you to. This butchery. This is the end result of your unchecked emotions. You have destroyed yourselves to reach us." The human smiled then, a thin, terrible smile. "You still don't understand. You saw our fire as chaos. It's not. It's choice." He gestured to the data core. "In there, you have the story of every species that bowed. That let you cure them of the things that hurt them. That traded their pain for your peace. Where are they now? They're entries in your archive. Perfect, harmonious, and extinct. Not wiped out by you, but by the universe. Because the universe isn't harmonious, overseer. It's a violent, burning, chaotic mess. And, the only thing that survives in a fire, he raised his left arm. On his vambrace, a simple physical switch was protected under a clear cover. He flipped it. Is a better fire. From across the ship, from the pod still attached, from the wreckage of the permanent sunset, from 100 secret places on the scarred earth below, synchronized signals were received. The human boarding pods had not just carried soldiers. They had carried shape-charged munitions, wired directly into the omniscient view's power conduits. The human looked at Klarn, his eyes holding not hatred, but a profound, unshakable certainty. The man who destroys his weak self, he said, quoting a philosopher his people had revered and, the Xylos had filed under dissonant irrational, can never be destroyed by others. We didn't come here to beat your technology. We came to prove you can't beat our nature. And, we burned the weak part of us that thought we could ever live on our knees. The charges detonated. They did not vaporize the ship. They carved it. The explosion was channeled, directed in a storm of fury and fusion, through the engineering bays, through the weapon banks, and into the heart of the crystalline data core. The very essence of Xylosian curation, the belief that the cosmos could be tidied, that chaos could be filed away, was subjected to the ultimate chaos, a star's fury, unleashed in a controlled, deliberate, human-fashioned hell. The omniscient view died not with a whimper, but with a scream of shearing metal and a light that outshone the sun for a fraction of a second. When it faded, the great ship was a broken spine, its central third a molten ruin, the archive halls a gaping, glowing wound. The surviving human pods, and the officer with them, were consumed in the blast. They had known they would be. The following silence was different. It was not the silence of the void, nor the silence of sharpening a blade. It was the silence after a verdict has been passed. On Earth, the survivors watched the firework in their sky. They mourned. And they waited. The Xylosian hegemony received the final telemetry, the garbled last words of Overseer Klarn, and the sensor images of their flawless arbiter-class vessel, broken by a species that fought with the deliberate, self-immolating fury of a cornered animal that had decided to take the hunter's entire world down with it. There was no immediate retaliatory fleet. There were debates. Reanalyses. The psych profiles were rewritten, not by junior analysts, but by the most senior hegemons. The label for humanity was changed. From chaotic potential, low yield to Sol 3 apex predator, existential class threat. Do not engage. The appended analysis was succinct. Species demonstrates a recursive capacity for self-annihilation as a proactive strategic measure. They conceptualize weakness not as a physical or technological state, but as a psychological one, specifically, the willingness to submit. To defeat them militarily would require a scale of destruction that negates any resource or strategic value their world holds. More critically, engagement risks triggering a total recursive self-annihilation response, the fallout of which, ideological, cultural, physical, is deemed uncontrollable and, potentially metastasizing. Principle observed, the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. Corollary, a species that will preemptively destroy its own weakness answers all threats with total fire. Recommendation, quarantine. Observe from a safe distance. You do not mess with humans. They answer with fire. And, so, the silence around Sol became a respectful one. A wide berth. Humans, picking through their rubble, rebuilding their pyramids in new forms, looked up at the stars they now knew were full of life, and felt a new kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a hard-won truth, echoing in the void they had scorched to earn it. To preserve what they were, they had to be willing to burn it all down. They had to become the fire, so that no one would ever dare try to snuff them out. The galaxy learned the lesson, and filed it away not under military strategy, but under cosmic law.